and welcome to this week's episode of Giant's Healthy Conversations. My name is Barry Shrier. I'm the founder of Giant Health. What we're doing in every conversation is bringing to our audience from around the world, we're bringing you experts in NHS healthcare procurement, innovation, and talking about key themes in healthcare in the UK and what the NHS is doing to adapting to changing demographic and healthcare priorities, how innovation happens in the NHS, the challenges for businesses that want to engage with the NHS, and so forth. So as a reminder, these videos are produced by Giant Health. We invite everybody to come to our website, www.giant.health. And in particular, if you live in the UK, we invite everybody to come to the annual Giant Health event. That's a 2-day festival of healthcare innovation, bringing together thousands of NHS leaders and businesses who are involved in developing new technologies for the UK health sector. This year, the Giant Health event is on the 9th and 10th of December in central London. So when we invite all of our viewers from around the world to go to the website and to register to attend the Giant Health event in December in London, England, and we hope to see you then. So this week, I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to an expert in NHS procurement and innovation and technology. So Lee Gutcher, nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining. How are you today?
I'm good, Barry. Good to see you again.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to this conversation. So, Lee, if you don't mind, could you begin by just sharing with our viewers a little bit about your background, your areas of interest, and what you're doing currently, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Barry. Thanks for this opportunity. So prior to moving to my new role, which I'll talk about in a second, I worked in the NHS in London for 16 years, most notably in across North Central London ICS. I worked as a operations manager in a acute secondary care trust, and then started working as a program manager, head of programs in North Central London ICB, dealing with some large-scale reconfigurations and consolidations and implementing new technology into various hospitals across the ICS. And then earlier this year, I moved over to the other side, I guess you say, to the private sector. I moved to a remote patient monitoring company called Lucy. And I moved as the director of strategic partnerships there to help Lucy scale their product up in the NHS and across the UK.
Brilliant. Well, congratulations on the move. And we can talk about that in a little bit, but I can imagine it's slightly different going from working as employee number 1,364,002 in the NHS to working in a small private business. But that's very exciting. And I'd love to hear about that a little bit later on in the conversation. To begin with, our audience mainly are people from across the UK and Europe who are involved in innovation and developing new technologies in the healthcare sector, as well as people that are directly providing healthcare services, many thousands of doctors, nurses, hospital managers, and so forth in our community. So just to take a step back very briefly, you mentioned a couple acronyms, which some people might not be familiar with. So what is an ICS? What is an ICB? What do they do?
Yeah, this is a habit, Barry. Yeah. So firstly, ICS, it's the Integrated Care System, and ICB is the Integrated Care Board. So basically across the UK, across NHS England, there's 219 individual NHS trusts, right? Many of those trusts have individual hospital sites as well. So there's hundreds and hundreds. What the Integrated Care Boards are almost like the NHS England carved up into 42 different regions. So, for example, I worked for North Central London Integrated Care Board, and we worked within the Integrated Care System. So the Integrated Care System is a collection of primary care trusts, it's social services, it's councils, it's secondary care trusts. It is everybody that's involved in a patient's care is all part of that Integrated Care System.
Brilliant. That's helpful. Thank you very much. And no need to apologize. I think every industry and every profession is abounding in acronyms. So that's just kind of the way the world is, isn't it? So Lee, looking very broadly to begin with, taking, if you will, a foundation view here, could you explain a little bit about examples of how procurement works in the NHS? And is there a procurement function? What are the stages of procurement? And this type of thing. So if you could help our audience understand a little bit about that. And what intrigues me, for example, is obviously we engage with many, many thousands of clinicians. These are expert doctors who have had very successful careers working for decades in the NHS. And what intrigues me is often we talk to them and I say, well, you know, what equipment, if any equipment, do you use in your job? And of course, they rattle off either 10 or 100 or 1,000 things, pieces of equipment, tech, that they're using in their job. And I ask them, you know, how did your hospital come upon that equipment? Where did it come from? Who bought it? Where was it sold from? And interestingly, the vibe I get is that almost nobody knows that.
Yeah, no, yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
It's not a judgment, by the way. There's no observation. There's no judgment there whatsoever. It's just an observation.
I think the first thing to say is that, you know, procurement in the NHS is very complex, and there's no, I think we're starting, well, the NHS is starting to get to a point where there is a standardized way of doing things, but because I mentioned there's 219 individual organizations, 42 different integrated care systems, the procurement practices are different throughout the country. There's not one single central place where you do procurement, right? So straight away, depending on which you might have procurement departments in a particular trust, or you could have it at an integrated care system level. But broadly speaking, even though it is complex, there is a structure to it and there is some steps to it. And I guess the 6 main steps that I'd like to talk about is firstly if you think about from the hospital side and the clinicians that you mentioned, or the operations managers or whoever it might be, it's firstly they need to identify their needs, right? So they need to identify what the requirement is, what's the requirement for a new digital health tool or implement technology that's required. And then what the NHS will do is then start to do some soft market testing, see what's in the market at the moment, start engaging some suppliers that they've done some desktop research on, and start asking some soft marketing questions. And then from there, there'll be, once the need is confirmed and there's a business case within the trust which has been approved, there'll be the tendering process. So people will be invited to bid for that particular tender, and that could be done through an open tender, or it can be done through some established frameworks. And I think we're all familiar, or certainly you and I are, Barry, with G Cloud, and I think it's currently G Cloud 13, but then it's now going to be G Cloud 14 very soon. But that is a framework that suppliers, health tech organizations can be part of and sign up to. And then that will, hospitals and ICSs can award directly to suppliers who are on that particular framework. And then once that tendering process is started and happened, and suppliers and companies have done their pitch and put their proposal forward, there's an evaluation. All the bids are evaluated, and it includes different criteria such as cost, the quality, the innovation, the long-term investment, and the alignment, of course, with NHS goals. And then there is a contract that's awarded to the best suited supplier, and then obviously terms are negotiated from there. So then that's the procurement process, and then implementation starts. And I've been part of, from the NHS side, been part of that as well, where it's such a mammoth task just to get, just to go through all the bids and actually award a supplier. But then arguably that's when the real work starts with the implementation, the execution. So it's unforgiving, to say the least.
Yes. So that's very, very interesting, and extremely clear, Lee. Thank you very much. Really, really helpful. Talk to us a little bit about that next phase, the implementation, because I assume the implementation informs the previous procurement processes.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, again, the organization, the NHS, will have their requirements and what's the solution that's required, what's the issue or the problem that they have that needs to be fixed, right? So then, therefore, getting the right supplier is number one, but then number two, it's ensuring that quality implementation, and also the NHS holding the supplier to account that you said you would do X, Y, and Z. You need to make sure you can do X, Y, and Z, because this is why we chose you, for example. So, and I guess just from, I've been a program manager, and I've worked with implementing tech in the NHS from the NHS side. And I would say the biggest piece of advice that I would give is for the tech company during that implementation stage and through all stages, just to be patient, and work with the NHS as best as possible, build those relationships, show willingness, roll your sleeves up, and to make sure that you have a product that you're implementing which is going to be there in the long term, right? And it's going to add value, because ultimately the contract is only for a certain period of time, and you want to renew that contract, right?
Yes.
And if you're not going to deliver because the implementation was poor, then the contract won't get renewed.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's very, very helpful and very clear. So thank you for those introductory explanations. Makes a big difference to have that, if you will, foundation understanding of the procurement function, the key stages, and so forth. So thank you very much for that.
And Barry, just actually as well, something's just come into my mind there.
Please.
Again, it's
Absolutely.
The integrated care system bit as well. And the other thing as well, do not underestimate just how powerful word of mouth is as well, especially that we're working in these networks and these integrated care systems. Hospitals are talking, or different NHS trusts and hospitals and individuals are talking more than ever, right? So if you've got a solution that is a health tech solution that's being implemented and it's working and it's adding value and it's meeting those NHS priorities and goals, then sure as hell the NHS staff will talk to other NHS staff, other trusts. So therefore, your product and your solution can spread like wildfire if you get it right. So again, it's not just a case of providing the product and then washing your hands of it. It's about making sure that it is implemented fully. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So Lee, that was a really interesting, good foundation summary of the steps, and that additional bit that you just mentioned, the word of mouth bit, is absolutely fascinating. Is that something anybody can engineer? In other words, as an example, let's say you are pitching your services as a business to a particular NHS trust. Is it possible to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. NHS Trust number one that I'm talking with right now, what other NHS trust do you engage with? Are you part of a local group? Could you help me with introductions to your peers in other hospitals? Can that kind of word of mouth or networking be leveraged, developed by the business that wants to engage further in the NHS?
Yeah, why not? I mean, we're seeing more and more ICS, integrated care system led procurements, right? So, and for example, the ICS that I worked in, there was 10. There is 10 secondary care trusts, and if you've implemented in one or two, then why not go and implement it into the third and fourth, etc. And and when you talk about can you engineer that? Well, yeah, you can engineer it. You can engineer it by building strong relationships. And well, I mean, that's underpinned by a product that's delivering, right? You can have as good as relationships as possible, but if your product is not delivering and it's not adding value, then it's the people are not going to spread that word of mouth. But yes, assuming that it is and it's a fantastic product, then you can. You build strong relationships, and then you can ask those questions and say, well, do you know what? We think that by expanding this to the next trust in your ICS, we're going to even create even more value, for example, and more patients are going to benefit from this as well. So, you absolutely can.
Nice. Okay. No, it's a very, very helpful insight, and perhaps one that's easily overlooked. If there's lots of quite official processes and procedures in place. Maybe it's easy to overlook from the commercial perspective all of those opportunities and things that one can do outside of the straightforward step-by-step processes and bid applications and so forth.
Absolutely, and I guess when we obviously at the Giant Health Conference this year, I will be running a how procurement works workshop and panel discussion with a couple of procurement experts as well, and maybe these are some of the questions that I'll be asking them as well, because I'll probably be moving into the realms where I'm a little bit unsure about this next bit that I'm saying. So I will certainly ask them at the panel discussion. But for example, if it is an ICS-wide procurement, tender which is being put out, then I assume that trust within that ICS can do call off contracts on that particular procurement as well. So therefore, you reduce the need for having to bid again for another tender, because it's an ICS-wide tender. Now, if a tender has been done with one specific trust and one trust only, then yes, you could build those relationships and word of mouth, etc. But then the likelihood is that you'll have to go through another tender process with another organization. But that's why we're seeing more and more integrated care system-wide tenders, because it just makes it more efficient, right?
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It certainly seems like a very positive move to develop that more centralized, coordinated procurement through the ICSs.
Absolutely.
Cool. Moving on from that, again, Lee, thank you very much. Super helpful, if you will, introductory summary about the procurement function, the stages, and so forth. Could you share with us your experiences? You were working in the NHS previously, and obviously you were engaging with businesses approaching you, or businesses approaching your hospital trust and or ICB, who wanted to market their products, their services, their technologies. What are some common misconceptions that you have come across? How procurement works, or to be simple about it, misconceptions about how do you sell to the NHS? In particular, obviously, from the business perspective, from the outside looking in.
Yeah, so I guess a common misconception then that I hear as well when I talk to people at conferences or talk to suppliers or whoever in networking events is that the NHS chooses the cheapest option in procurement, and in reality that cost is a factor. And it also weighs heavily as well, but also what weighs heavily is the innovation, but also the long-term value that the NHS is looking for. I truly believe, especially with the integrated care systems and the things that we've just been discussing about, spreading your products throughout an ICS to gain maximum value, the NHS is looking for long-term partnerships. So it's in procurement and in the tender process, cost is obviously going to weigh heavily, but it's the other areas are not completely ignored. It's not a race to the bottom. I think the NHS does have the foresight to see that a particular product, fine, it may not be the cheapest option with capital or from the outset, but in the long term, this is how much it's going to save. And the NHS do see that, and it does recognise that as well. So yeah, and I know a lot of people struggle with that because,
Sure.
and I've seen it from the NHS side. I've been involved in tenders where there's been, large organisations who have undersold themselves just to win the tender, right? But if you do that, the NHS also knows as well that if you're going in as the cheapest option, then the resource that you can probably put towards this is not going to be as much as what it probably or may need. So
Yes.
then we go back to the whole implementation thing, don't we? And adding value, and then you just won't get the contract renewed, or you won't have that word of mouth being spread.
Right.
etc. So
because you've priced too low, therefore you can't afford the support needed throughout the contract. Therefore, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
I've seen this on one or two occasions. Yes.
Yeah.
Personal experience. I'm not saying every company do that. Some companies take the hit, but some haven't. I guess the other thing which we've touched on as well, another misconception, is that procurement is a single centralized process across the NHS when really it isn't. It's decentralized across even at a trust level, but more and more it's becoming an integrated care system procurement kind of service as well. Yes. But it's certainly not one single procurement service for whole 219 NHS trusts.
No, exactly. Yeah. How are you, when you were working within the NHS, again, it's clear that you're not there anymore, but what did you see evolving? Because, of course, the ICS concept itself is very, very new. The establishment of the ICBs is only a few years old now, isn't it? And you were there for a while before that. So does that, so number one, what did you witness in terms of that evolution? And number two, does it look like it's going to stick In other words, do you think that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there will be the ICBs, or are they like the whim of a government?
So I guess the biggest thing that I saw evolve in my time, especially as in head of programs at North Central London ICB, was just how much. So from, I think, when was it? Was it 2021 or 2022 when the ICS's ICBs went live? I think it
That's
was.
right. Yeah, 22. Yeah.
And I saw it took a short while for hospital trusts and those in senior roles and middle management to actually start collaborating, talking to each other. But
Sure.
that did start to happen, and once that started to happen, and we started to get an understanding of each other's needs and priorities, and coming up with common issues, for example, then we were able to start working together about what some of the common solutions that are out there then, right?
Brilliant.
So that certainly is one of the things that evolved and really helped with integrated care system wide procurements as well. Yeah, because sometimes as well, one issue that one particular trust might have, another trust might not have that. So therefore, you had to be selective of who was going to be involved in a particular tender. It doesn't mean just because it's an integrated care system wide tender that's being released that, for example, in North Central London, all 10 trusts have to go ahead with it. They don't. You could have some that choose some choose to, and some that choose don't to not. But then those trusts could also, the ones that don't from the outset, could also join at a later date.
Yes.
So I saw things like that evolve a lot as well, which was good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean that's going in the right direction, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer your second question, I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball, have they?
Of course not.
I would personally like to see integrated care systems still be around in 5 years and 10 years time. I think if it's not called integrated care systems, then they'll be called something else. We can remember the one that were called STPs, and I forget what that abbreviations for now, but maybe strategic transformation partners. I'm not sure, but and there's been lots of different terminology for a collection of hospitals as well. But I do believe in the integrated care systems, and I believe in the integrated care boards and the direction that it's going to. We've got a new government. It's very early days still, but it feels to me that the sound music is that things will, certainly in the short term, stay as they are, which I think is good, because there's been a hell of a lot of work being put into getting these right and getting to that point where I've just mentioned, Barry, that you actually get hospitals collaborating with each other and talking to each other, and not, for example, looking at each other as like competition, for example,
Exactly.
And that's really hard for maybe some people to grasp, that hospitals would be in competition with each other, but ultimately sometimes it can be.
Sure. Well, I think that was an intention, wasn't it? Decades ago, was to have hospitals competing with each other, because that, in theory, would drive efficiencies, basic kind of supply and demand economic principles, not necessarily good ones, but interesting experiments. Lee, we don't have too much time left. I hope you don't mind, but if we could maybe summarize a little bit of this, once again, from the perspective of the outside businesses that are wanting to engage with the NHS. So from your own experience, from your own perspective, could you share maybe just a few, if you will, tips or general guidelines? Let's say a bunch of our viewers have products and services, in particular businesses from abroad, who have not engaged with the NHS before. Maybe a couple of suggestions or ideas about, number one, where do you start? Where's the front door in a hospital or an ICB? And then number two, guidelines regarding navigating, have clarified, which I think everyone understands now, and your descriptions have been super helpful. Navigating the complexities of it, that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's lots of, it is complex, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. You just and just not knowing where to start, basically. But I think the first thing is get out there as much as possible and talk to as many people from the NHS as possible. This can be at conferences, especially NHS-led conferences as well. The Giant Health Conference that's happening in December, Barry. I know that there's a fair few NHS colleagues who are going there as well. So get talking to them, build up those relationships and networks. Be patient. I can remember when was it now? Back in October 22, I went to the Web Summit conference in Lisbon, which was amazing. And they had one day was a specific health conference stage. And I can remember one of the talkers saying there that the healthcare industry will be one of the last, if not the last industry to be disrupted, right? Because the risk is high. We're dealing with people's lives here.
Yes.
So one of the biggest challenges that the NHS have is balancing innovation with risk, right? So
Sure.
I think suppliers need to be patient, and they need to be there in it for the long run, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the best way that you can get around and to put yourself in the best position is evidence of what your product can do. And this can be done through running small pilots, for example. If you build a relationship, or you know of any clinicians or consultants, professors, even senior nurses, for example, where you could pilot your product on a small cohort of patients, show evidence and show that the product works, and then start small and then build up from there.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
But it is really important, to be patient as well. But building those relationships also as well, right from the outset, is important. And just building relationships takes time as well, right?
Absolutely.
You're not going to get right at a conference when you meet an NHS senior manager or whoever it might be. You're not going to get a deal struck there and then, as much as you may want it, but you've got to persevere and be patient with building those relationships. And if your product is good and you have evidence to show it, then it will speak for itself.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. And in particular, it's fascinating, of course, because there is so much conversation about tech innovation, about implementing tech, about adopting tech, about how very large systems like the NHS can accelerate their innovation and adoption of tech. But it's all about people. Like you said, it's about relationships. First and foremost, it's about getting to know people and building relationships with them, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a few other thoughts were coming into my mind there,
Sure.
Barry, as you were talking. But again, I'm talking about starting small, starting with a pilot, getting the proof, etc. Because when it comes to big tenders, for example,
Yes.
if you include in your tender, in your bid, that you've got the evidence, and we've done it in the NHS, in this particular organisation, this was the outcomes of it, then that's going to score you a lot of points, right? Other ways, when you talk about the front door as well, obviously we've mentioned about G Cloud 14. Right. 13, I'm not sure what iteration it is right now, but one of those, being on that framework can give you an advantage, and being able to fast track your product into the NHS as well. And notwithstanding all the different accelerator programs that are popping up as well. There's some popping up at trust level, ICS level, and then national level. You've got, Digital Health London, which is an accelerator program, and then you've got Health Innovation Network as well, the NHS Health Innovation Networks as well.
Yes.
There's lots of different ones. I'm sure a giant can post them somewhere, but these getting onto those programs as well is another route in.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. There's a lot of those organizations, aren't there? And the HINs, like you mentioned, the Health and Innovation Networks, used to be called the AHSNs, didn't they, last year?
Yeah.
And so that, like you said, Digital Health London, a lot of the individual hospitals have innovation officers, don't they? And those are people, I guess, that are also worth talking to. Brilliant. Hey, well, look, Lee, this has been so incredibly helpful. And any final points you'd like to make? We're rounding off on any tips or guidance to businesses from the outside that are wanting to understand how the NHS works, understand how procurement works, and understand how to get their foot in the door, so to speak.
Yeah, so I think the things that I've mentioned, I'll try and summarize as well. But again, NHS procurement is complex, but it is structured and there is a process there.
Yes.
I come to do at the Giant Health Conference on Monday, the 9th of December. I think it's the 1 p.m. slot. We're doing how NHS works workshop and panel discussion with some procurement experts, and we'll literally start working through those different high-level steps and asking some of the important questions that people want to know. So if you are available and you're coming to the conference, then please come to that talk, and we'll talk in a little bit more detail. But yeah, so it is complex, it is structured, there is a process, and be in it for the long in it for the long run. Build relationships as much as possible, and then try and get as much evidence as possible. Evidence, relationships.
Exactly.
Patience. There we go. That's my.
Other than those things, it's an easy approach, isn't it?
That's a piece of cake.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, Lee, this has been so interesting and actually incredibly informative. And so it's very kind and generous of you to allocate the time. Your descriptions have been extremely clear and informative. And I'm very certain that a lot of the thousands of our viewers from around the world will find this quite valuable and specifically useful for them. So on behalf of all of them, we'd like to thank you. And once again, appreciate your time. And certainly hoping that a lot of our viewers will be able to come to the Giant Health event, like you said, on the 9th and 10th of December in central London. Learning more about that, all you have to do is go to our website, www.giant.health. And we also welcome comments on these videos. And we welcome anybody who has questions to message us directly. And we're always happy to share those questions with Lee and get answers back to everybody. So it's about building the community, and that's what we're all committed to doing. So Lee Gutcher, thank you very much for your time, and great to see you, and looking forward to seeing you in London at the Giant Health event on the 9th of December.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barry.
Excellent. Thank you very much.